Right, so let's continue with Chavtes Amud Beis. That's 29b in Masechta Megillah, and we're in the middle of a discussion. What exactly is considered the portion of Shkolim? What parsha do you read for the portion of Shkolim? We have two opinions in the Gemara. Whether you read the portion of Kisisa, or that's Shmuel. Rav said you read the portion of Sabbath B'nai Yisrael. That's the same parsha as you read for Rosh Chodesh. So those are the two opinions we have. And the Gemara was challenging now, trying to find the various different places to challenge each one of these opinions. So the Gemara asks now, so let's go back to the Gemara's question where we're up to. Misiri. So the Gemara is asking now from a Brisa. The Gemara says Misiri. I'm going to ask you a question. And the Gemara is quoting now a Brisa over here. A Brisa, that's the statements in where the Tanoim gave their statements. So over there we see that Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. It says in the Brisa like this. When do we read Rosh Chodesh Ador Shechal Lihiyos B'Shabbos? Rosh Chodesh Ador that falls on a Shabbos. That is when Korim the Parshas Shkolim. That's when we read the portion of Shkolim. Okay, that we learned in our Mishnah too. That Rosh Chodesh Ador, and when it comes on Shabbos, that's the Shabbos we read the portion of Shkolim. Now we have a machlokes. What exactly is the portion of Shkolim? Is it the portion of Kisisa, or is it the portion of the Korbanos? That's the two opinions. But this Brisa just says that you read the Parsha Shkolim. But it adds one more statement. The statement that it adds is Umaftirin b'Yehoyada HaKoyen. We do the maftir that talks about the Kohen Yehoyada. This is in the Melachim Perek Aleph. It talks about the Kohen Yehoyada, about the Vayikra Melech Yehoyash LaYoda Kohen. That's the whole parsha, the whole Haftorah that we do on Parsha Shkolim. Parsha Shkolim, we do that Torah Melachim Beis, Perek Yud Beis. We do this Haftorah, which is connected, which is associated with Yehoyada HaKohen. So now the Gemara asks, okay, so let us examine this. If we're doing this part which is connected to Yehoyada HaKohen, that's what we do. So let's see. We know that the Haftorah needs to be similar to the Torah reading. Whatever you read in the Torah, that's what you read the Haftorah. They have to have a connection. So the Gemara is going to say like this. We can understand, according to the opinion, who says that we do Kisisa. Okay, this was the opinion of Shmuel, I believe, right? Was it Shmuel? Shmuel Omar Kisisa. That was the opinion of Shmuel. So it is okay, according to the Manda Omar, which is Shmuel, that we do Kisisa. So now we can understand Hainu de maftilin the yoda hakoyen. That's why it makes sense to do the maftir yoda hakoyen. Why? To dominate, because the haftorah is similar. What is it similar? How is it similar? The haftorah is similar to the Torah reading. The Torah reading is kisisa. In kisisa, it talks about giving money to redeem your soul. And over there in the Perigio, over there it says kesef nefoshes erkoin, to give money of the souls of their value. So the Torah also talks about giving tzedakah in the value of the soul, to redeem your soul, to give tzedakah to the Beis Hamikdash. So if we say like Shmuel that we should call him Iski Sisa, then we understand why the Haftorah is Yoda HaKoyen, because they're both talking about giving money for redemption of your soul, both in the portion of Kisisa and in the prophet of Yoda HaKoyen. Elo Lamanda Omar. But according to the opinion of Rav, he says that which one do you learn? No. Which one do you do? Here. What use it to call? But according to the opinion that says that we do korbani lachmi, which is the talks about bringing the korbanos. It doesn't talk about money. The pasuk over there is talking about shkolim, according to Rav, is the parsha of korbani lachmi liishai. So midomi, is it then compared? Why would we be reading the haftorah of Yehoyada, which does not compare to the parsha of korbani lachmi? That talks about korbanos, and the parsha talks about redemption, giving money to redeem for your soul. So what's the connection between the haftorah and the parsha? So it must mean, the Gemara infers from this that it must mean, therefore, that the real parsha is the parsha's kisisa, because that's when it makes sense for having the haftorah there. And the Gemara says, no, dummy, it's still compared. Even though it talks about the korbanos, but it's compared kid Rabbi Tovi, like we learned before, Rabbi Tovi. Over there, the Gemara learned from the pasuk, Zois Oilas Chodesh, that you got to bring a new korban from the new shkolim. So while it's not explicit in the pasuk over there that you're giving money, you're giving shkolim, but we know that there's a new, from the new collection, the Oilas Chodesh B'Chodshe, we learned before from this pasuk, that there is a new shekels, the new, starting from the month of Nisan, there were new shekels over there. And that's based on the pasuk as Karboni Lachmi. In that parsha over there, it says, so therefore, it does make sense. He tried to prove what the portion of Shkolim is. He tried to say that it cannot mean like Rav, the portion of Korbanos, because it doesn't seem to have a connection. The portion of Yoda HaKoyen of the Navi doesn't seem to connect to the parsha of Korbanos. It only seems to connect to the parsha of Itzki Sisa, which talks about giving Koifanash, giving the money for a redeeming of the soul, and that seems to fit. The Gemara says no, because since from the parsha of Korbani Lachmi over there we learn out, as Rashi says, Kidrabtovi Zois Oilas Chodesh, meaning there has to be a new korban that comes bishkolim Omar. That this is a Chodesh means that it's shkolim. So therefore, this is the additional. So that's the connection. Okay. So the Gemara tried. The Gemara is going to give another trying to resolve who is right, Rav or Shmuel. Rav says the portion is the parsha of the Karbonis of Skorboni Lachmi. Shmuel says it's the portion of Kisiso, is the parsha Shkolim. And the Gemara is bringing various brises to try to prove. So now, the Gemara eventually is going to conclude that it is the parsha of Kisisa, but the Gemara goes through various attempts to see if we can actually prove that. So the Gemara, Misivi, I'll ask you a question. This is also from the previous Mishnah. We learned that Chal Liyos, if Rosh Chodesh Ador comes out to be the Parsha HaSemuchala, in the Parsha which is close to the Parsha of Shekolim. We have a Parsha of Shekolim, and the Torah reading, the regular Torah reading, Rosh Chodesh Adar, when we're going to read the Parsha Shekolim, comes out to a Parsha which is next to the Parsha Shkolim. Just to give you, the Gemara is saying, the Parsha Shkolim is the portion of Kisisa. So let's say that you have the portion of Kisisa. What's the portion before Kisisa is Tetzaveh. What's the portion after of Kisisa is Vayakel. You have Kisisa. So we're saying, if Rosh Chodesh Adar comes at the Parsha of Tetzaveh, which is close to the Parsha of Kisisa, because after Tetzaveh comes Kisisa, or if Rosh Chodesh Adar comes in the Parsha of Vayakel, which is right after the Parsha of Kisisa. Look again, so this is what the Mishnah says. Chali is beParsha Smuchalo. If Rosh Chodesh Adar, when we're going to read the Parsha Shkolim, comes out to be in the portion which is next to the portion of Shkolim, which is next to the portion of Kisisa, Bein Milfoneo, whether it comes next to it, it's before Kisisa, which means it would be in the portion of Tetzaveh, Ubein Milachadeha, or whether it's going to be after in the portion of Vayakel. So the Mishnah says, the Brisa says, Koirin Oisa, the Koiflin Oisa. So you read it on Rosh Chodesh Adar, and you duplicate it. Basically, it means, so let's say if it came out on Tetzaveh, Rosh Chodesh Adar, so you'll read it on Rosh Chodesh Adar, and then the next week you're going to repeat it because then it's Kisi, so that's the real Parsha. So you're going to read it and you're going to repeat it. Or if it's in the portion of Vayakel, you're going to read it in Kisi, so the regular, and you're going to repeat it in Vayakel because you're going to read the Parsha Shekol. So again, Chal, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out, Liyos beParsha Smuchalo, in the Parsha which is next to the Parsha of Shekolim, which is the Parsha of Kisisa, Bein Milafoneho, Bein Milachareho, whether it is the portion that comes before Kisisa, which is the portion of Tetzaveh, Ubein Milachareho, whether it comes in the portion of Vayakel, which is after Kisisa. Koirin Oisa, the Koiflin Oisa, you will read it and you will repeat it. So you will repeat it in the Shabbos that follows. So this is something, the Koiflin Oisa is a Rashi b'Shabbos Shniya. On the second Shabbos, you will repeat Kisisa. Even though you already read it on the first week, you're going to read it in the second week again. You're going to have 2 times to read. But the Gemara's issue is that this whole thing only makes sense if we're talking about that the parshas Shkolim is the portion of Kisiso, because the month of Adar comes out around those parshias. So it's possible for the portion of Shkolim to be on Rosh Chodesh Adar. It could be in the portion of Tetzaveh, it could be in the portion of Yaakov, which would be Shas Muchalo. But if we are talking about the portion of Korbanos, Vaidaber Hashem, which is the Parshas Pinchas. Parshas Pinchas is in the summertime. That's already in the month of Av. That's not really in the month of Adar. So that's what the Gemara is asking. How could the other opinion, how could Rav say that the Shekolim is Vaidaber is the portion of Bamidbar? Then this whole Raisa that talks about Milfoner Mulachre doesn't make any sense. You're not going to have Rosh Chodesh Adar next to the portion of Pinchas. It doesn't come there. So look at the Gemara. So the Gemara says like this: Omar. It is okay, according to the opinion, Kisiso, that what is the Parsha Shekolim? It is Kisiso. Hainu de Misrami Ba'uzimna. So this, we understand that it happens during that time. That's the time when we read it. We read it during that time. We read Kisisa in the vicinity of Rosh Chodesh Adar. In that section, that part of Adar. But according to the opinion of Rav, who says that we Shkolim is Tzaves Korboni, that Tzaves Korboni, that is the Parsha Shkolim, Mi Misrami Bahu Zimna. Does this then happen during that time? Do we then read the Parshas Pinchas in the time of Adar? I mean, how are you going to have the same Parsha? It's a totally different time of the year. Mimis Rami Rashi, but Parshas Pinchasi. That portion, according to Rav Tzavis Karboni, that's in the portion of Pinchas. She's Muchal Chodesh Av. That's close to the month of Av, not Adar. So how could all this be talking about? How could Shmuel say? How could Rav say that that's the Parsha Shkolim? Then this doesn't make any sense. But the Gemara says yes. No, you're incorrect, but yes, this can come out. Why? He says, Libnei Marova the Maski the Raisa the Tlas Shmim. For the people of the West, meaning the Eretz Yisrael, they conclude the Torah in 3 years. Actually, it's brought down. They took every parsha that we have and they split it into 3. So it turns out that instead of finishing the Torah like we do every year, they finish it every 3 years. And therefore, it's possible for the Parshas Pinchas to be in the time of Rosh Chodesh Adar, so it does fit if we read the Torah once in 3, we finish the Torah once in 3 years. The Gemara says, in Libnei Marava the Maski Libnei Mitlashnim, for the people of the west of Eretz Yisrael who conclude the Torah once in 3 years. The Maski Oraisa. So Rashi Masayim Chamisha Chumoshim Pam Achas L'Sholishonim. They conclude the 5 Chumoshim once in 3 years. Not every year as we do. So therefore, according to their schedule, they can have the Parshas Pinchas in the middle of the Rosh Chodesh Adar. Okay, the Gemara says, well, we have a very clear, after this whole discussion back and forth, the Gemara says, Tanya Kabosei de Shmuel. We learned in a Braisa like Shmuel. Now, of course, Shmuel and Rav are Amoyroim. If we have a Tana to support them, that gives it a lot more legitimacy, that says that is actually the ruling. Because we learned in the Braisa, Rosh Chodesh Adar Shechol Liyas B'Shabbos. When the Rosh Chodesh comes on Shabbos, doesn't say you read Shkolim, it says Koirim Kisisa. Just tells you very directly that the portion is Kisisa, which is what Shemuel said. Okay, end of the discussion. Here we have a Braisa that supports Shmuel, and therefore Shkolim is the portion of Kisisa. Go further. Omar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha that Rosh Chodesh Ador Shechol Liyos B'Shabbos. When Rosh Chodesh Ador comes on Shabbos, so then Moitzin Sholish Torahs. We take out 3 Torahs. We take out. And the Koirin Bahen, and we read in them Echad Binyonei Shel Yoim. One of them we read the regular of the day, so whatever the Torah reading for that day is, that's the Parshas HaShavua. The Echad and the other Sefer Torah we do B'Shel Rosh Chodesh. We do for Rosh Chodesh because it's also Rosh Chodesh. The Echad and one, the third one, we do B'Kisisa. We do B'Kisisa, that's the Parshas Shkolim. So you have one for the Parshas HaShavua, one for Rosh Chodesh, and one Torah to read the Kisisa Parshas Shkolim. But Omar Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, further he said, the same thing is Rosh Chodesh Teves Shechal Liyos B'Shabbos, that when Rosh Chodesh Teves comes out on Shabbos, again, over here it says Mevin, before it says Moitzin, here it says Mevin, you bring Sholish Torahs, you bring 3 Torahs, V'koidim Bahem, and you read in them, Echad Binyonei Shel Yom, that's the Parsha, V'echad B'Rosh Chodesh, one Rosh Chodesh, V'echad B'Chanukah, because Rosh Chodesh Teves is Chanukah. So therefore, we do also Chanukah. Okay, so you do these 3. Basically, besides Simchas Torah, which we take out 2 Torahs, 3 Torahs as well, these are the 2 times of the year that we take out the 3 Torahs. We take it out both. So when we have Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, either the Parshas Shkolim or Shabbos Chanukah. Actually, the same thing is true with Parshas HaChodesh. Sometimes if Rosh Chodesh comes out, Rosh Chodesh Nisan comes out on Shabbos, you also have these 3 Torahs. The Gemara doesn't bring it down over here, but that's the way it's done. Here we're talking about when Rosh Chodesh Adar comes, when we read the Parshas Shkolim, but the same thing is when it comes Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that's when we do the Parshas HaChodesh. But the Gemara wants to know why we need both things. These are both statements that were said by Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. It's basically saying the same thing. It's not really different. It's basically saying the same thing. The question is, why did he have to say it in both cases? Again, what we're doing here is we're reading from the Sefer Torah of the week, and we're reading the Rosh Chodesh, and then we're reading the extra, whether it's Chanukah or it is Shkolim. So why does Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha have to tell you the same halacha twice? And the Gemara therefore says, Utzricha. It was necessary for him to say this halacha twice. The Gemara explains. The itmar beha, because if he would have just said, in the case of Rosh Chodesh Teves, we still would not know that the same thing applies to Rosh Chodesh Adar. Why? If he would have just said this din by Rosh Chodesh Tevis, we don't know that the same halacha applies by Rosh Chodesh Adar as well. Why? Because you would say like this: "B'hokam Rav Yitzchak," that Rav Yitzchak Nafche only said it by Rosh Chodesh Tevis. Aval b'hach, but by Rosh Chodesh Adar, Kirav Svilalei. Maybe he holds like Rav, who says that what's the portion that you read for Shekolim? The portion for Shekolim is the portion of Pinchas, Tzaves B'nai Yisrael. That's the same portion of Rosh Chodesh. So over there would be no need for a third Sefer Torah. If we hold like Rav, that the portion of Shekolim is the portion Tzaves Aaron, which is the same portion of Rosh Chodesh, so then we would not need a third Sefer Torah, because that one Sefer Torah would be used for Rosh Chodesh and for Parsha Shkolim, because Parsha Shkolim is also the Parsha of Tzav. So that's what we're saying. So if he would have just told you about Rosh Chodesh Tevis, you would say yes. Rosh Chodesh Tevis we take out to the Avu Bahach, but when it comes to Rosh Chodesh Adar, Kirav Svirle goes like Rav Omar, Parsha Shkolim. He says that the Parsha Shkolim is as Korbani Lachmi, and therefore Ubishtei Toiros Sagi, and two Torahs would be sufficient. We don't need, because Rosh Chodesh and Shkolim are in the same Torah. Komashmalon, that's what Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says. No, I don't go like Rav. I go like Shmuel, and therefore you're going to need three Torahs, because the portion of Shkolim is not the same portion as Rosh Chodesh. Shkolim is in the portion of Kisisa. Rosh Chodesh is the portion of Pinchas. Then you have the Parsha of Shavuot. Okay. So the Gemara says that then why doesn't he only say the halacha that Rosh Chodesh Adar you take three, and then we'll know already that by Rosh Chodesh Tevis you take out three too. We would know that also, because we would learn that from Rosh Chodesh Shvat, from Rosh Chodesh Adar. Why doesn't he say about Rosh Chodesh Adar? Then he doesn't have to say the halacha about Rosh Chodesh Tevis, because it's the same din. You take three Torahs over there. You take three Torah. Just like by Rosh Chodesh Adar, you take one for Shabbos, one for Rosh Chodesh, and one for Shkolim. Over there, you'll take one for Shabbos, one for Rosh Chodesh, and one for Chanukah. And the Gemara answers, Gemara answers that one was derived from the other one. Actually, Rav Yitzchak Nafcha only said the halacha once. Apparently, he only said it by Rosh Chodesh Adar. They quoted him because of what he said. They learned that the same thing would apply to Rosh Chodesh. So they quoted Rav Yitzchak Nafcha as saying that by Rosh Chodesh Tevis, you take out three Torahs, but he didn't really say it a second halach. He said it once. He said it with regards to Rosh Chodesh Adar, and one was learned from the other one. Choda Miklal Chaver to Itma. One was learned from the other one. We derive it from the other one. That's how we learn. Okay, so that's the time. Now again, I mentioned before, the Gemara does not bring down that you take out three Sefer Torahs when Rosh Chodesh Nisan is on Shabbos. Over there is also, because apparently that's the same halacha as Rosh Chodesh Adar on Shabbos. So therefore, the Gemara has no need to say that. It will be the same halacha. Itmar, we learned in the Memra. What do we do? Rosh Chodesh Tevis Shechali is Mechoil. We were talking about Rosh Chodesh Tevis in Shabbos. What about if it comes out on the weekday? What are the two things that we have on Rosh Chodesh Tevis that comes on a weekday? We have two things there. We have number one, we have Rosh Chodesh. We also have Chanukah. Rosh Chodesh Tevis is always Chanukah. Hanukkah starts on the 25th of the month of Kislev, so you'll always be in the month of Hanukkah when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, even if it's only Lamed Yom sometimes, or Chavtes Yom, but it's always going to be Rosh Chodesh, is always going to be in Hanukkah. So how do we do the reading of the Torah when we have Rosh Chodesh and Hanukkah? Omar Rabbi Yitzchok, says Rabbi Yitzchok, Koru Kloso B'Rosh Chodesh. You read three, you have a total of four people, because Rosh Chodesh you read four people. So you read three in Rosh Chodesh, and V'chad B'Chanukah, and you do one in Chanukah. But Rav Dibba the Ben Chayfa, he says just the opposite. He said, Koru Tlosa B'Chanukah, you read three in Chanukah, V'chad B'Rosh Chodesh, and one reads in Rosh Chodesh. Amar Ramani says, Ramani, that it makes sense to read first Rosh Chodesh. So he says, Kavosid Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha Mistabra. It makes sense, like Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha, that you should learn, you should read three in Rosh Chodesh and one in Chanukah. Why? Mistabra, because the Todir, V'she'ene Todir Kodim. We have a rule: if something is more constant than the unconstant, then the constant comes first. Basically, what it means is Rosh Chodesh we have 12 times a year. We have a lot of times that we do Rosh Chodesh. Hanukkah comes once a year. Yeah, it's 8 days, but it still comes once a year, and it's so. What do we do more? We do more Rosh Chodesh than we do Hanukkah. What we do more comes first. So therefore, we do three in Hanukkah, and then we do three in Rosh Chodesh, which is the constant, and we do one in Hanukkah. That was Rab Moni's opinion. Amar Rav Avin Kavosid Rab Dimi Mistabri. He says, I think that it's logical to conclude, like Rab Dimi, that the first three should read Hanukkah and the fourth Rosh Chodesh. Why so? Because it says, Mi Goram L'Revi Sheyover. How come B'chlal we have a fourth Aliyah? It's only because Rosh Chodesh. Mi Goram L'Revi Sheyover. Rosh Chodesh. That is Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is what brings the whole cause to read. If not on Chanukah, when it's not Rosh Chodesh, how many people do we read then? We only read three. It is only on Rosh Chodesh that we read four aliyahs. So why do we read four aliyahs b'chol Rosh Chodesh? So it makes sense, Hilkach, Revi, b'Rosh Chodesh b'Yamikri. Therefore, since it's coming because of Rosh Chodesh, that's why we need to read the Revi. Needs to read Rosh Chodesh because the whole Revi comes because of Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so do we do three Chanukah, or three Rosh Chodesh? So what is the conclusion? What happened with this? Rabbi Yosef Omar, Rabbi Yosef says, Ein mashgichim b'Rosh Chodesh. We don't pay attention to Rosh Chodesh. In other words, Ein mashgichim, not to lasis iker, to make it the main. And Rabbi Omar, Ein mashgichim b'Chanukah. We don't pay attention to Chanukah to make it the main. So again, each one, some machloikis, do we make Chanukah the three, or do we make? He says no, we don't look after Chanukah. I wonder why they're using the negative versus the positive. Why doesn't Rabbi say that Chanukah, that Rosh Chodesh is the main, instead of saying that we don't care about Chanukah? You know what? But the Hilchasa, the halacha is, that's the way we do it also, that ein mashgichim b'Chanukah, that we don't make Hanukkah the main Rosh Chodesh Iker. So you have 3 aliyahs in Rosh Chodesh, and 1 aliyah you have in Hanukkah. Itmar. Now we have a further member. What happens is when Kisisa, when the Parshas, when Rosh Chodesh Adar comes in the Parsha of Atot Tetzaveh. Now, here we're going according to the view that you're still going to be reading the Parsha. I mean, we were reading about that. We're still going to be reading the Parsha of Atot Tetzaveh. So, and we see that all these Sefer Torahs you're reading, so that means we don't uproot it not to read it. We're reading it that week. We add, because we had before the Gemara from the next Mishnah that there is 2 opinions about that. But anyways, over here, it says when it comes on Atot Tetzaveh, when Rosh Chodesh Adar is Atot Tetzaveh. So what do we do? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafche says, Koru Shisha Meva'atot Tetzaveh Ad Kisiso. You call 6 people, you start from the Atot Tetzaveh, do the whole Parsha Kisisa. How many people do we usually use from Atot Tetzaveh to Kisisa? Usually it's 7. But here you're going to do 6 people from Atot Tetzaveh to Kisisa. And then V'chad, and the other one is going to do the Shkolim, is going to be Mi Kisisa Ad Ve'osisa. Over there you go make the Mizbech, which is after this next Parsha. So he says you do 6, instead of 7, you do 6, the Parsha of Atot Tetzaveh. The 7th one follows into the portion of Kisisa. Amar Abaye says Abaye disagrees. Turning the page over now to Lamed Omen Aleph. Amri, he says the people will say Ukma, he doesn't abide it because that's not good. Ukma would become Ukma also. They're standing because they're standing there, which means you're not going to be able to tell that Kisisa is red because of the portion of Shikolim. Because you're just reading the whole Parshas Tetzaveh, and then you're going into the portion of Kisisa. A person listening to you is not going to know that you read the Parsha Shkolim. He's going to think that you just continue reading the Parsha of Tetzaveh and you ended it over there by the Parsha of Shkolim, by Kisisa. The Ukma Hudukmukma, Rashi, Amri, they will say Ukma Hudukmukma. What he's trying to say to you, Ein Hadover Nikar L'Shem Parsha Shkolim. This thing is not, you can't tell, it's not recognizable that you're doing it for the Parshas Kolim. Elo Sabri Shaloi Nistaima Parshas V'Atot Tetzaveh Kam. The people are going to think that the Parsha V'Atot Tetzaveh did not finish. They're not even going to know you did Parshas Kolim. You just continue the Torah into the Parsha of Kisisa. So you can't just do 6 and a 7. Hello, Rabbi. But Rabbi says do differently. You go, the 6 people go through the entire till you read already Vasisa. In other words, the first 6 people go beyond the Parshas Tetzaveh, and they do the Parsha of Kisisa as well. That's still the 6th. The Chad, and then 1. Tani repeats V'kari, the Kisisa ad Vasisa. He goes back and he reads from Kisisa ad Vasisa, that's the 2nd time. So, first time you read all the way till Vasisa, till the end of the portion of Shkolim, and then you do it again. Tani V'kari, Chayzer V'sheina Likvis, V'Kisisa, he goes back to read from Kisisa ad Vasisa Kir Nechoshes. When until Vasisa Kir Nechoshes, you read it a 2nd time. Okay. So Basically, the Gemara now, even though we learned already this brisa before, we touched it, but the Gemara now thinks that basically, what's the machlokes between Abaye and Rav Yitzchok Nafche? Whether the first six go through the whole Parsha Shkolim and we repeat the Parsha Shkolim, or the first six read up to Parsha Shkolim, and the seventh reads the Parsha Shkolim. But they're going to think, one of the things now, from the Brisa, that when it says to repeat, it's talking about within the Shabbos itself. In the Brisa, it seems like we repeat. We'll see in a minute. And that repetition, we thought that it's talking about the on that same Shabbos that we'll read it two times. That seems to be clearly like Abaye against Rav Yitzchak Nafche. Let's look inside. Meisher. So we'll ask you a question. This is the Brisa we had previous page. It says, Chal liyos beparsha asmucha lo. I guess, I don't know. I guess it would be easier if I had a chumash to show you exactly, but I hope that you're following at least somewhat the Gemara, the different parshas that we're talking about over here. So, how if Rosh Chodesh Adar comes the parsha smucha to the portion that is next to the parsha Shkolim that we're going to be reading for Rosh Chodesh Adar, the parsha is connected whether before or after, meaning it's either the parshas Tetzaveh or either you're reading it, Rosh Chodesh is on parshas Tetzaveh, so you'll read it after, or it's on Rosh Chodesh is on parshas Vayakel and you're going to read it beforehand. So what are you going to do? Koirin Oiso, you will read it. You'll read the Parsha Shkolim. The Koirin is you'll duplicate. We know Kufli we learned before means the next Shabbos you'll repeat it, but now the Gemara thinks that Koirin Oiso means that you're going to duplicate it on that same Shabbos. You're going to read it twice. And the Gemara is asking, therefore, so Abaye makes sense. Abaye says, we read it twice. You do the parsha and you duplicate it. But according to Yitzchak Nafche, is kasher. Yitzchak Nafche says you just read it once. So how are you duplicating it? And the Gemara says duplicating it doesn't mean in that Shabbos. It means you're going to duplicate it the next Shabbos. The Gemara says, Omar Leir Rav Yitzchak Nafche Ulabai. He says, let me ask you. Rav Yitzchak says, I'm going to ask you according to Abaye too. So Mele, you have Lefoneo beforehand, in other words, before it, which is what? Which is the Parsha of Tetzaveh. So that you understand how you're going to duplicate it. Because like we say, if Rosh Chodesh comes out of Tetzaveh, you're going to read 6. You're going to read 6 through Kisisa. You're going to read again the portion of Kisisa. But La'achareo, but how are you going to find it in the Parshas Vayakel? Over there, you already finished. So what does it mean duplicating over there? But in the Mishnah, it says koiflin duplicating. So he says the duplicator. What are you going to explain? Duplicating means you read it 2 Shabbos one after another. Not that you're going to read it twice in one Shabbos. That means you read it 2 Shabbos one after the other. Here too, it's talking about you duplicating b'shabbosis. So don't bring me a proof that it doesn't mean b'chlal that you're going to read it twice. I can be right. You're reading it once. And what does it mean? It means you'll read it this Shabbos, and the next Shabbos is Parshas Kisisa, so we'll read it again. Okay, so now what happens? Chalali is b'kisisa atzim. What happens if Rosh Chodesh Adar is on the kisisa? That's the Parshas Kolam itself. How do you read that? Amar Rav Yitzchak Navcha said Rav Yitzchak Navcha, Koru Shito Min V'Asiso Ad Vayakim. So you start from after Shkolim. You start from the pasuk V'Asiso Mizbach Nechoshes. Rashi quoted before. V'Asiso Kir Nechoshes. He did V'Asiso Kir Nechoshes, not V'Asiso Kir Nechoshes. And then, and you read it till Vayakel, which is the parsha after Kisisa. V'Chad Kori, and you have one reading V'Chisisa Ad V'Asiso. Then you go back and read from Kisis to the Parsha Shkolim. Matkiv lo Abaye challenged it. Hashto Amri lemafreyahu dekori. So people are going to say you're reading backwards because you read from the second part and you're reading it backwards. You started the wrong way. Let me see. Again, I'm not sure. Are you following with me exactly with the parshas the way it's going here? Because I know it's going back and forth over here, but I'm not sure that you're following without looking into the pasuk over there. So the way he suggested to do, let me just see if I can get here for a second on the screen. Let me try to get the parsha. No, let me see here. Give me a second over here. Come on. Actually, let me do. Let's see over here. I just want to show you this last thing. I mean, we missed out on the previous one. So this one would be, you see, the Parshas Kisisa, the Shkolim, would be from Pasuk Yud Aleph. This is the beginning of Parshas Kisisa. Okay, all this is this is the Parshas Shkolim. Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, and Yud Dalet. Tezvav, Tezayin, that's it. So he suggested, so what do you do when Shkolim comes out of the Parshas Kisisa? So he suggested, you start the 6 people to read from here, start from Pasuk Yud Zayin, read 6 people to the end of the Parsha, and then go back and read this for the Parsha Shkolim, because this is the Parsha Shkolim. But Abai, he objected to this. He says, how could you say that? People say you're reading backwards. First you read this one, and then you read the other one. You can't do that. Alomar Abaye, but rather Abaye said, no. First, Korushito Ad Vayakel. First you do 6 people. You start from the beginning, you go 6 people all the way to the end, to the next Parsha, till the Parsha of Vayakel. Then, for the Parsha Shkolim, you do again a repetition from here only to this Parsha, the Parsha of Shkolim. Gemara says, Tanya Kavose Abaye. So we learn like Abaye that Chali is Bikisisa Atzmo Koirin Oiso V'Koiflin Oiso. That if the Chodesh Adar is on Kisisa itself, you read it first and then you repeat it. Repeat it means that you're going to bring it out and you're going to read it on the next Shabbos. Okay, so again, I don't know if you're following with me or not exactly in the parsha. It's a little bit challenging because
when you don't look inside, it's a little bit hard to really